Imagine sacrificing one piece after another, not for immediate gain, but to create total chaos and relentless pressure. The result? A wild attack that ends in a spectacular checkmate. All of this happened in Rashid Nezhmetdinov's final masterpiece, played at the age of 57. Let's dive in and see if you can find his brilliant ideas too. White starts with d4 and Nezhmetdinov plays the king's Indian defense. Knight f6, knight f3, d6, c4, knight d7, and white goes for the system with the fianchetto of the king's bishop. g3. Black, of course, also prepares the fianchetto. g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, knight c3, and both sides castle kingside. Nezhmetdinov pushes the central pawn forward and white plays queen c2, developing the queen and vacating the d1 square for the rook in order to create an unpleasant x-ray and put pressure on the d-file. c6. Nezhmetdinov takes under control the important squares, opening the queen's diagonal. Rook d1 and rook e8, reinforcing and supporting the possible advance of the e-pawn to e4. For this reason, the most natural reaction by white would have been e4, the natural move after which white would have retained his slight advantage. But instead of e4, white makes a dubious decision, h3. However, white has his point. By playing h3, he provokes his opponent to push the pawn forward. And that's exactly what Nezhmetdinov does. e4, crossing the center of the board, getting the space advantage on the king side, putting pressure and restricting his opponent. So why white provoked his opponent to push the pawn forward? We will see now. Actually, white has quite a creative idea in mind. Knight h2, opening the bishop's diagonal, and the pawn is attacked 3 times, while it's defended only twice. So Nezhmetdinov defends it in the most natural way, d5. And now we can see white's idea. The c6 pawn controls the b5 square and also defends the d5 pawn, which in its turn defends the e4 pawn. So white captures on d5, black must capture with a pawn, after which the b5 square isn't defended anymore. So white might think about knight b5, which looks quite unpleasant. The queen, together with the knight, controls the c7 square, and knight c7 would fork the black rooks. Besides that, the d5 pawn is weak. It isn't defended by the c6 pawn anymore, so the only defender of this pawn is the black knight. However, white cannot play knight b5 right away. That would be premature. White, of course, is threatening knight c7, but black can defend by playing rook e6, and knight c7 would be a blunder. At first sight, white is winning the exchange. He forks the black rooks, but rook c6, attacking the queen, the knight, black is winning material. For this reason, instead of knight b5, white first plays bishop f4, increasing the pressure on the c7 square, and now that the bishop is on f4, it seems that white is ready to play knight b5. That's why Nezhmetdinov prevents it by playing a6, taking this square under control. So black has defended the b5 square, but his pawn is still under attack. And now we can see the final part of white's idea, why he provoked the e4 advance. The d5 pawn is weak, so white plays knight g4, eyeing the h6 square and also attacking the only defender of the d5 pawn. So white has created an immediate threat actually. Knight h6 check. After that, if the king moves to h8, knight takes f7 check with a fork, winning the black queen. And if the king moves to f8 instead, then bishop d6 check. And the only move would be rook e7, and white is winning the exchange. So after knight h6 check, black would be forced to capture with the bishop, and after bishop takes h6, of course, black wouldn't have the dark squared bishop anymore, and the dark squares on his king side would be terribly weakened. So to prevent all this, Nezhmetdinov captures the knight. And now we can see the final part of white's idea. The black knight has been deflected from f6, that means the d5 pawn isn't defended, and instead of getting the piece back, white had in mind a piece sacrifice, a temporary piece sacrifice. He captures the unguarded d5 pawn. Black is temporarily up a piece, but his knight is under attack. Knight c7 with a fork is coming. So white is going to get the material back, and most probably white will win material. Besides that, the e4 pawn is weak now. So what should black do? His knight, his g4 knight is under attack. If he retreats the knight, saving it, if he plays knight f6, hoping that white plays knight c7 with a fork, the rook is unguarded, but black can play knight b6, defending the rook. This rook is also defended, so no matter which rook the white knight captures, black would recapture, and for a rook, black would have two minor pieces. That means black would be up material. But actually, knight f6 would be a mistake, because the knight closes the queen's diagonal. And instead of knight c7, white would play bishop c7 in this case, and the black queen is trapped, as you see. For this reason, Nezhmetdinov, after knight takes d5, for this reason, Nezhmetdinov doesn't save his knight. He keeps the knight on g4 and instead moves another knight on f6, bringing the knight to the king side, closer to the white king, opening the bishop's diagonal, and also attacking the white knight. For this reason, white cannot capture on g4. That would be a mistake, because black in his turn will also capture, and there is no fork anymore on c7, and black remains with an extra piece. So by playing knight f6, Nezhmetdinov actually forces his opponent to fork his rooks. Knight c7. That's exactly what happened in the game. So black is still up a piece, but his knight is still under attack, and the knight is forking his rooks. And we have reached our first critical position. So what should black do? You can pause the video and try to find Nezhmetdinov's brilliant idea. In order to expose the enemy king, create total chaos, and keep the opponent under relentless pressure, Nezhmetdinov gives back the piece and sacrifices the rook. So he pushes the e-pawn forward. He wants to destroy white's kingside. White captures the knight. Now the material balance has been re-established, but the knight is still forking the rooks. Black in his turn captures on f2, destroying white's kingside. And also, now white gets a terrible weakness on e3, and this weakness will tell, as we will see. So, what should white do? He must move his king. If he captures on f2, that doesn't make much sense, because black is going to capture on g4 anyway, and king takes f2 would let black do it with a tempo. Knight takes g4 with a tempo, activating the knight, activating the bishop, bishop's diagonal opens, and depending on where the white king retreats, black has multiple attacking ideas, and he will play one of them. He can play g5, attacking and kicking out the bishop, which must keep an eye on the crucial e3 square. So the knight might invade with a tempo, attacking the queen. Bishop f5 is another idea with a tempo, attacking the queen. And of course the d4 pawn is also under attack. It's attacked twice and defended only once. So it doesn't make much sense to let black capture on g4 with a tempo. So instead of king takes f2, white plays king f1. And Nezhmetdinov still captures on g4, but without a tempo. And white now is going to win material, because both rooks are under attack. So why did Nezhmetdinov go for this position? Because he definitely has compensation. The white king isn't safe. The pawn is quite strong. It's defended by the knight. Besides that, the knight is eyeing the weakened e3 square. And the black pieces are quite active. So white must make a decision which rook to capture. First, let's start with the more tempting one. What if white captures the whole rook, the unguarded one? Knight takes a8. White is up a whole rook. And now we will see what Nezhmetdinov prepared in this case. He was going to play g5, attacking the bishop, the main defensive piece. This bishop is the only defender of the crucial e3 square. So what should white do now? If the bishop moves somewhere here, then knight e3 of course would be a fork. If the bishop moves to c7, attacking the black queen in its turn, then black would still play knight e3 check with a fork, and after king takes, first black saves his queen with a check, and next move he captures the queen. What else? If the bishop retreats to c1, it's still defending the e3 square, but in this case, black can play queen f6. Defending the pawn, that means the knight is free to move, it doesn't need to defend this pawn anymore, and black is threatening knight h2 checkmate in one move. Of course, white can defend against this threat, let's say by playing bishop f3, closing the queen's diagonal. Now, if the knight moves, white would simply capture the pawn, but black has another terrible threat. He can play queen h6, and of course the threat of queen h2 followed by queen g1 checkmate is terrible, and there is nothing white can do. He can capture the knight, eliminating one of the main attacking pieces, but the queen still invades, threatening checkmate, and after white defends with e3, vacating the e2 square for the king, still the check follows, then the bishop falls with a check, and then the rook falls with a tempo, so black is winning. So what should white do after g5? His bishop cannot move, so he must make another move. Let's say if he tries to bring back the knight into play, knight c7 with a tempo, then black simply captures this bishop. So the main defender is eliminated, and black has terrible threats such as knight e3 with a fork, winning the queen, or even stronger, first capture the pawn, defending f2 pawn, after which black would create two checkmating threats, knight h2 checkmate or knight e3 checkmate, and there will be no defense against all this. So for this reason, capturing this rook, this useless rook, doesn't make any sense. Black's attack would be too strong. White realizes this and captures another rook, a much more active one, the rook that puts pressure on the e-file and controls the important e3 square. So knight takes e8. Now white is up the exchange. Queen takes e8. However, for the exchange, black has compensation. His pieces are more active. So the pawn is still very strong, the knight, the bishop are quite active, and black is ready to activate his queen side. Bishop f5 with a tempo is coming. After that, if white plays e4, rook c8 again with a tempo is coming, and all black pieces would be very active. For this reason, white plays queen b3, moving the queen away from this diagonal and putting pressure on the b7 pawn. Nezhmetdinov, so when his queen was on d8, he could have played g5 right away to attack this important bishop. Now his queen is on e8, so g5 right away doesn't work, so he plays h6, ignoring the attack on b7 and preparing the g5 advance. So what should white do now? g5 is coming. He should have continued his development. Rook c1, for example, is the first line suggested by the engine. And after possible g5, white can play bishop e5, and his e3, his main weakness, e3 square, is still defended by the queen. And the engine evaluates this position as equal. But instead of simple development, white greedily captured on b7. Bishop takes b7 followed. However, this move turns out to be a mistake. So again, engine recommends bishop takes a simple move, bishop takes b7. And now we can see why capturing on b7 was a mistake, because white is forced to recapture with the queen, after which the queen doesn't control the e3 square anymore. Besides that, white doesn't have the light squared bishop, which controlled the long diagonal anymore, so his long diagonal is also weakened, and black simply plays rook d8, attacking the d4 pawn for the second time, and it turns out that there is no defense. Black is going to capture with the bishop, defending the f2 pawn, again untying his knight, after which knight h2 check would follow, the pawn would promote, and that would be the end. So, indeed, how can white defend the d4 pawn? he cannot push the pawn forward, he cannot push the pawn forward because the pawn would close the queen's diagonal. The white queen would stop defending this diagonal, and the black queen would invade e4. The same would be the case if he defends the pawn with the queen, let's say by playing queen b4. So again, the white queen would stop defending this diagonal. So black would play queen e4, threatening checkmate. So as you see, white doesn't have the light squared bishop anymore, which used to defend this diagonal. So black is threatening checkmate, and there is no defense. Let's say if white plays e3, vacating the e2 square for the king, queen f3 would follow, and there is no defense against knight h2 checkmate. What else can white do? d5 or queen b4 doesn't work. If he plays e3, defending the d4 pawn, then still g5 would follow, attacking this valuable bishop. And black is ready simply to capture it, and if it moves, then e3, of course, which isn't defended by the white queen anymore, it would fall. Knight takes e3 check would follow, king takes f2, black would get back the exchange, then he would capture on d4 with a check, and his attack is devastating. But instead of instead of bishop takes b7, which I have just shown you, Nezhmetdinov plays in the artistic way. So he was an artist. His intention after by playing h6 was to play g5, attacking the main defensive piece. White has just captured on b7, attacking his rook, but he doesn't care. He sacrifices more material, this useless rook, and executes his initial idea. g5, attacking this bishop. White captures the rook, now, and Nezhmetdinov eliminates this important defensive piece. G takes f. Now white is 2 exchanges up. However, black still has compensation because his pieces are much more active. For example, this rook isn't doing anything, it isn't developed, it's out of play. This rook plays a purely defensive role, just defending the pawn, and the white king is still in trouble. He isn't completely safe. So what should white do? The engine recommends, as black is ready to play bishop e6, attacking the queen and also the bishop, the engine recommends queen b8, pinning this bishop and also attacking the pawn. And it's true, for a human, the variation that I will now show you looks dangerous. So black can play, the white queen is far away from the white king, so black can start a very strong attack, it might seem to a human, with knight h2 check, and after king takes f2, queen e3 check. So the lonely king is attacked by the queen, by the knight, then the pawn also falls with a check, but after king h1, the engine shows that black's attack actually fades away. So black doesn't have sufficient attacking resources. But of course, going for this position as white against Nezhmetdinov looked extremely dangerous, so it's understandable that white didn't do it. He didn't move his queen far away from the king's side by moving her to b8. Instead, he made the most natural move. Black has just captured on f4, so white recaptures, and his queen still defends the third rank. But now bishop e6 follows, attacking the queen and the bishop. So how should white retain his material? Bishop d5 doesn't work because of simple bishop takes d5 and knight e3 check with a fork, winning the queen. If d5, attacking the black bishop in his turn, so letting black capture the bishop but recapturing, it doesn't work either because of queen h1 checkmate. So the only way to save both the queen and the bishop is queen b7. What next? The engine recommends now bishop d5, attacking the queen. If the queen retreats, the bishop on a8 of course would fall. So the best thing white can do is to capture the bishop and this of course runs into knight e3 check again. So black wins the queen, but after bishop takes d5, actually white has advantage. For the queen, white has 2 rooks, he also has 2 extra pawns, and black must fight for a draw. But the engine says that it's the best thing black can do. However, Nezhmetdinov doesn't agree. He isn't going to defend and fight for a draw. He wants to increase the pressure. So instead of bishop d5, he plays bishop c4, maintaining the pressure and creating new threats. e2 is under attack now. Queen e4, defending e2 and offering the exchange of the queens. Of course, black avoids the exchange. Queen d8 follows, eyeing the h4 square. And queen h4 would be quite unpleasant. After queen h4, black would play queen g3, creating checkmating threats. Queen g1 checkmate or knight h2 checkmate. So white must do something about it. And he does. King g2. Opening the rook's way. Now queen h4 doesn't make any sense because of rook h1, and the black queen must retreat. So we have reached another critical position. White has just played king g2. How should black increase the pressure? And I will give you a small tip. How should black start weaving a mating net around the white king? You can pause the video and try to find Nezhmetdinov's move. So he plays f5, defending his knight, reinforcing it, and taking the e4 square under control. And we will see later in the game why it's so important. Of course, the f5 pawn is untouchable. White cannot capture it, again, because of knight e3, check, fork, winning the queen. So the queen must move, and she moves to c6, attacking the bishop and threatening to capture it with a check, and also defending the e2 pawn indirectly. Black cannot capture the pawn because of queen e6 check, and again the bishop falls after that. For this reason, after queen c6, Nezhmetdinov plays king h7, moving the king away from this diagonal. Now white cannot capture the bishop because that would come without a check, and that would run into knight e3 check with a fork again. For this reason, after king h7, white must do something. Black has very unpleasant threats. He is threatening bishop takes e2. His bishop is untouchable. Besides that, queen h4 is quite unpleasant threat. So what should white do? The engine recommends queen f3, bringing the queen closer to the white king, and the engine says that white consolidates his position and he can defend against all threats, and the engine gives advantage to white. Black still has compensation for his sacrificed material, but according to the engine it's not sufficient. However, it's understandable that after being under pressure for such a long time, white finally makes a serious mistake. Instead of queen f3, and it's understandable, he doesn't want to move the queen away from this square because she's targeting the bishop and she's quite active. He plays king f3. So the king himself defends the e2 pawn, and we have reached our final critical position. So the king himself defends the e2 pawn. Now that the king is on f3 and not on g2, white is threatening to capture the bishop, as there is no knight e3 check with a fork after that. Besides that, white has defended against the threat of queen h4. Queen h4, which would threaten queen h3 checkmate in one, would run into rook h1, and the queen must retreat. So what should black do? Queen h4 doesn't work. The bishop is under attack. The e2 pawn is defended. Actually, king f3 was a terrible mistake. because it lets black checkmate the white king just in a few moves. And you can pause the video and try to find this spectacular checkmate. So, queen h4 right away doesn't work because of rook h1 kicking out the queen. The queen cannot move to f2 because of the pawn. So, Nezhmetdinov promotes to the queen with a tempo in order to vacate the f2 square for his queen. And only after rook takes f1, his queen invades h4, threatening checkmate in 1, and it turns out that there is no defense. Now that there is no black pawn on f2, rook h1 runs into queen f2 checkmate. And how else can white defend against the checkmate in 1? If he plays king g2, then queen h2 check, forcing the king back, after which black can choose either queen h3 checkmate or bishop takes e2 checkmate. So there is no defense against checkmate, and for this reason, in this position, white resigned. And now I recommend watching one of Nezhmetdinov's most beautiful games, where he refutes the opening encyclopedia with fantastic sacrifices. But first, I'd be grateful if you like this video and subscribe, as it's really helpful for the channel growth.